Hi, my name is Jeremy Toeman. I'm the Chief Product Officer for WarnerMedia's Innovation Team, and I'm here today to talk about the role of product management and product leadership in the media industry. And the way I've framed the presentation is it's 5 important things to know and 5 tips to succeed in what I would call a bit of a confusing industry as a product leader. Now, by background, I've been in the media space for actually over 25 years, doing digital media, hardware, over-the-top TV streaming, connected home, and more. I started at a company called Mediabolic, which was a middleware company where we built the first ever streaming media box, patented multi-room DVR, and the company was acquired by Macrovision, which is now part of TiVo. I was also at Sling Media, where I was head of product for the Sling box, which is now better known as Sling TV as part of Dish Networks. I also worked with startups like Boxy, Sonos, Sphero, Waze, and Dropcam. Had my own startup called Digit, where we had a TV discovery experience called Next Guide and got acquired in 2012. From there, I went to spend some time at CBS Interactive, as well as Joyn, which is a Hulu of Europe, and am now at WarnerMedia. And let's get started. So, 5 things to know about this confusing world. You know why? Because this industry is confusing, and every time people enter it with a logical sound, this is how things ought to be type of thinking, I've seen results in a lot of failure. Fundamentally, it's also one of those rare industries that has resisted a lot of internet-based transformations and internal adaptation and change to those adaptations has been a bit slower than we might think until recently. Because now the times are changing and most media companies are still trying to figure out how to become technology-first companies. How to prevent the next Netflix from becoming a top streaming player and do it themselves. So these are the 5 things that I think are key to not overlook for anyone entering the field, especially in the product leadership role. So we'll talk about how the industry is changing, what are the platforms that make sense, how the legacy world's so important, the entry and rise of big data, and our fun part where the role of product matters so much. Now, I take a bit of a rip from the headlines approach to my presentation, so every bit of content we'll see was new in the past few weeks. So let's talk about industry going through change. Right now, more than ever before, actually, it's massive change in the media industry, which means the role of product is becoming increasingly important to help the companies understand what that change might look like, set goals around that change, and be successful throughout. So, for example, I'm sure everybody listening to me has heard of TikTok, maybe even used and consume a lot of it, but understanding what their growth looked like in the past couple of years and how quickly, where we already thought user-gen content was kind of done with YouTube, nope, here it comes yet again in a totally different format. So we'll address TikTok a few times today because they're one of those companies you can't overlook today. Here's another example of crazy change. Hamilton, the movie, which was probably going to be one of Disney's biggest movies of the year, instead of debuting in theaters due to COVID, they decided to release it straight to digital, straight in the Disney Plus platform. Now, for many of you may know, they're trying this again right now with Mulan, but with Mulan, they're charging for it. So look at how quickly companies are responding and addressing that kind of a change. Another example, if you've heard of the movie Trolls World Tour, many of you have not. I've already seen it with my kids. Now this came straight to digital, and there's 2 key things to know. A, it was financially viable. Trolls World Tour made more money in 3 weeks on demand than the Trolls original movie did in 5 months in theaters. The second important thing here is this is the first time we ever really seen a breaking of the ranks between studios and theatrical releases. And we're going to see the fallout from that for quite some time to come. So a fundamental thing to remember as a product leader is you must have a change-oriented mindset. If you come into this world thinking the things you know are the things you know and therefore they're true forever, I hate to tell you this, but 6 weeks from now, they're half wrong again. So you've got to be one of those folks really willing to roll with the punches because that change is as exhilarating as it could be scary for some. The other thing on the same note, keep in mind that the role of product itself is new within the media field. So you get to be that shepherd of change for an important industry. Now, as we look where change is coming, it's bringing us new platforms. I would argue that almost every day we learn about a new platform that we have to leap from one to the other to make sure we're ahead of the world. Think about this almost as if you were building apps, but there was a new smartphone OS you had to accommodate once a quarter, or there was a new browser type coming out every other month. That's what it takes to support the media landscape. So here are a few important things that have happened recently that we should look at as platforms. I don't know who I've got as Travis Scott fans here. When he had a concert live in Fortnite, over 12 million people watched it live, and now over 43 million people have consumed the entirety of this concert in Fortnite. What does that mean as a platform to a media person, especially to a product one? Should we look at launching a movie in Fortnite, right? Should the James Bond premiere be in the royal red carpet room in a Fortnite landscape instead of a real theater? I'm not saying that either, but it's the kind of decisions we have to start thinking about as our world is changing and our audiences are changing. Another great example, if you're not a gamer, there's a brand new game called Fall Guys. It launched less than a month ago, grew to over 16 million players on PS4 alone in 2 weeks. On its 4th day of use, there were over 2.5 million streams on Twitch. And brands like KFC are looking at how they can get into this game, which, by the way, if you don't know, is sort of what if Minions met American Ninja Warrior. It's a weird game, but it's a ton of fun. Should Warner Brothers put Batman capes in Fall Guys or Wonder Woman outfits? I don't know. It's hard to make these decisions in such a fast-moving world, but we need to be thinking about them right away. Switching topics for a second, look at the AVOD market. Now, AVOD stands for Advertising Video on Demand, and this is a 3-year snapshot. So we see over 3 years, not only has the players changed, we've lost Go90, which was a Verizon effort, we gained Pluto TV, but as of today, Pluto TV's already been acquired by CBS Viacom. So if you were making product plans in 2016, look how much your world has changed by the time 2018 rolled around. And that's barely 3 years. Another good example, the big 5 streaming in 2020. Now you'll see at the bottom of this list is Disney Plus. But wait a second, a year ago, it didn't even exist. And in fact, as of today, we now have added both HBO Max and Peacock TV to the list. Who knows where they'll be in a year from now or 2 years from now. There's a lot of change happening on these platforms, and we need to be ready to account for it. Now, one other interesting thing to note is churn. Now, every product person cares a lot about losing users, we know that. But what happens when you exist in a world where people only come for content? Right? People only come to a service. Maybe they want to watch the latest Star Trek show or Stranger Things or whatever the show might be. When that show comes to an end, they may well leave that service. The good news is they may be back. So it's a new type of thinking about losing and gaining users is you're always staying on your toes because the users you lost may well come back not because they didn't like your product, but they were just waiting for the next season to emerge. So a little different rules on how we treat some of our KPIs. Now, to this all, and I'm talking a lot about change and what's new, I also want to make a second to not forget where our past was. Because the biggest mistake I see new PMs make in this space, and I don't mean this to be ageist, but there's a general misunderstanding and lack of actual respect around older ways of making money. And I don't mean that in a harsh way, but more of be aware of how many opportunities there are for monetizing and rules of an older industry. So here's an example, the US advertising market. Now, of course, we all know that Google and Facebook make up the lion's share of the space, but take a look at the moment you go past internet, we're on TV, radio, and magazines, right? Industries that many people would think are completely dead. And yet in the next couple of years, we'll see over 17 billion a year spent on radio-based advertising. So there's huge markets to be had as long as we're paying attention to other ways of looking at monetization, because the old ways sometimes work really well. Another good example of that, I'm guessing many of the people watching this are big OTT users, Netflix, Hulu, etc. Well, the reality check is there's still more people watching live TV than there are watching on OTT. In fact, there's still more people using their DVR than watching streaming services. Don't get me wrong, the shift is underway and we anticipate this reversing over the next little while. But that little while could take some time. And even if these numbers were reversed, this is huge, huge market shares. Another good example of how we need to understand this crazy world of media, retrans. It's a term most of you probably haven't heard of, and I don't blame you. It's one of those industry to industry things that happens in our world, but there are many, many, many of them. And this one alone is a $12 billion a year industry for something that would probably take me a few more minutes just to explain as a concept, and it's not alone. So really an important thing I'm going to say right now is you've got to be ready to learn as you enter this space, because there's going to be a lot of learning to do. Let's talk about copyright for a second. While as users, we all love to see fan edits and remixes and all the cool things happening on YouTube and other platforms, there's not a single content company on the planet that does not care very much about protecting what those assets are. Now, maybe they're giving those out for people to go off and make cool experiences with. Maybe they're not, but you're often going to be in a role where paying attention to copyright policies, laws, and procedures may vary from piece of content to piece of content, brand to brand, etc. And then the final thing on the legacy world is understanding pay TV market. We've talked about cord cutting for, 20 odd years. And yet, if you look at this chart, it's only really the last 5 years that we're starting to see a major impact. And in most cases, that impact is less about cord cutting and more about what we call cord nevers, younger people who in their first apartment or first home never even bothered to subscribe to cable. Today, that's about 25%, but we anticipate this growing over time. In the meanwhile, let's not forget, there's a lot of people out there still watching good old pay TV. So in summary, on the legacy world is always be learning. I've been in this space for over 20 years and still feel like I need to learn new things every week that goes by. Welcome big data. The newest thing to enter the media world is data. Now, to be fair, this is an industry built on Nielsen. Nielsen data has been the currency for 30 odd years now, 40 odd years now. And there's an old saying, which is half of every dollar gets thrown away. Half of every ad dollar gets thrown away, but we just don't know which half. So this is still, unfortunately, fairly true, but not for much longer. For one, we're already seeing terms like big media data wars, right? If we're having data wars, that means there's a lot of action happening with data. So let me give you a few examples of that. Spotify collects over 400 terabytes of data a day. That is a tremendous amount of data to be handling. And as we all know, Spotify is a very data-driven company. So what happens when we apply this kind of thinking to the AT&Ts and WarnerMedias, which are obviously the same company I work for, but also Verizon and Comcast and all the other companies, as they start collecting and ingesting data, the future is very bright for interesting new product innovation. Another good example is smart TVs. So Nielsen ratings, believe it or not, still happen from people entering journals, writing things down in books. But now we're seeing the rise of smart TVs in almost every home in America has one today. So what happens with all that data? What can we learn about TV viewing behaviors? But also, how do we protect our users' privacy? At my company, data privacy is taken extremely seriously because we're dealing with information that has a lot of history around it, and consumers don't always want that going outside their houses. So we're trying to take things very seriously and very securely, and it's important in the role of product is how do we think about those things? Netflix is well known for their use of data. For those of you who don't know the show House of Cards, David Fincher, director, and Kevin Spacey, actor, they were actually picked through big data. So the Netflix team found that their audiences were big fans of these two, as well as some of the genres, politics, dramas, etc., and used that data to make this bet, which turned out to be effectively a $1 billion bet for Netflix in the positive side of things. Another area that's getting a lot of attention today is clustering and looking at patterns. People who are fans of this are also fans of that. And how do we use that to build better models, better products, better experiences? And then the final thing is bringing it back to Nielsen. And I'll be fair, I don't usually go to Wrestling Inc. for my news, but they had a big study on how Nielsen is changing their sports reporting data sets and methodology, which will make a big impact on ratings, which will again make a huge impact on all the product people in all those companies. So you're familiar as a product person, your familiarity with the world of data should give you a leg up coming into this industry, but you're probably gonna also spend a lot of time really educating those around you as to the value and the opportunity around that data. And next up, content is still king, but I'm gonna argue that product might be queen right now. What I mean is this, is people come to our services for a show, a movie, an episode, an article, a clip, a song, who knows, a meme, who knows what the thing that they showed up with, but what they stay for is good experiences. Again, to be fair, you have to have great content to go in the mix, but the better your recommendation algorithm, your navigation, your sign-up flow, all of these types of aspects of the user experience matter in a world where watching TV or listening to music isn't just by pushing channel up or channel down. One area you obviously know about is A/B testing and how important that is at some companies. Well, there's a great opportunity as a product leader to bring A/B testing into the media world and show how much more potential we have at building even better products. To that end, the downside of things are when things go wrong, people are very unhappy. I think this is a world where we are judged a little more harshly than your average app or game or website, because when people come to watch shows, they just want to watch shows. You know, no one's telling a work-at-home parent that Disney Plus is out so they can't drop their kids in front of whatever show they wanted to watch, right? It's a different set of rules that we're playing by, and so the stakes are often a little bit higher on the product team. And by the way, to be fair to Disney, I think their launch actually was spectacular, given the level of prior art that they had to deal with in the form of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, etc. Another area I want to talk about is user experiences around consumer mindset. There's a lot to read on this, so I'm going to skip ahead a bit. But in the past, we'd always thought about TV watching as a lean forward or a lean back activity. I'm leaning back on my couch just with my remote, or I'm leaning forward at my computer, typing or interacting in some way. Well, the truth is these worlds have blended fully. People are sometimes leaning back, but often second screening. Sometimes leaning forward, playing a game while watching a movie. So there's a lot of different things that are happening at the same time, and understanding the varying consumer mindsets is again an area where the role of product will come to shine in the media landscape. Now, I don't mean to pick on Quibi. I'm not trying to pick on competitive networks, platforms, or anything else, but I would argue that from a user experience perspective, Quibi overinvested, in my opinion, on their rotate feature functionality. I think this is a great example where if Quibi had been my product, I might have thought of launching a YouTube channel, right? They've licensed and produced all this amazing content. What about testing it out on YouTube first, getting a sense of impact, figuring out what the real opportunity is here? Instead, it's a company that's raised over $1 billion, and their launch went less than spectacularly, which doesn't give them as much room to be flexible down the road. And then finally, another term that you all know well, NPS scores. It's long been studied in the cable and media landscape. It's only now being really put to work. And so as you can see from this chart alone, the tech-first companies have a leg up on the traditional pay TV providers in an NPS basis. And because of the rise of on-demand services, streaming services, this is going to matter even more. So as much as user expectations are constantly rising, content stays king, but the product experience is about to be the biggest differentiator we're going to see in this space. So the more you can keep a focused direct-to-consumer mindset will be a huge win for wherever you land. Now, that's what you need to know getting in. So let's talk about tips to be successful. I'm hoping these provide a little interesting insight to what the job might be like on a day-in, day-out basis. So we're going to talk about making sure we're having fun, building relationships, staying out of the messes, recognizing the difference on platforms, and understanding one key thing about, let's just say, why we can't be as agile as we want. We'll get to that in a moment. So keeping it fun. I can't tell you the number of times and people I run into, especially new people in the space, who just take it a little too seriously. And I don't mean it's not important. Like, we're dealing with 9-figure budgets for movies, right? So it's a lot of money being spent, a lot to be taken seriously. But at the same time, our job is to entertain people and create really, really fun experiences. So I would argue that this is one of those fields where you can think a little out of the box and bring any creativity, inventions, and ideas to bear, and may well see the light of day with them. So let's go into why we can support this. First of all, I don't know about you, with 8 hours of sleep and 8 hours of work, where the other 10 hours are coming from, so the math doesn't quite work, but it just tells you how much people want to be entertained. I actually have a mentor whose entire theory is that humans are on this planet for the purpose of being entertained, and I think the data is starting to support that theory. Another thing, to show an example of how people are having fun, if you've heard of Bandersnatch on Netflix, it's an example of what's called a branching narrative. Basically, it's choose your own adventure. Well, this is just scratching the surface of storytelling. We're going to see all sorts of fascinating new ways to tell stories, make movies, make shows that are really going to bring storytelling to a whole different level. And this is where you get to be a part of that. What can we be doing with augmented reality, multi-screen experiences? There's so much left untouched in the space. A great example, Rick and Morty, they make video games. I don't know if you've seen some of their video games or watch even the show. If you're at all familiar with the show, they've been off making all the weirdest games. Some of them are hidden. Some of them are like Easter eggs. And it's perfect for a Rick and Morty fan, right? Just like a show, maybe This Is Us wouldn't have quirky video games because the fan base is looking for something different. Each different narrative type gives us the opportunity to flex those creative muscles. And then a final good example is in LA, Netflix is actually building an interactive experience for IRL people, right? You can actually go see this thing. I think this is just a taste of where things will go. When I was at CES this year, the Westworld marketing team had a private dinner that was blogged about by and reported by a variety in the media that was supposedly one of the most interactive, insanely cool uses of tech and storytelling that they had seen, and that was for dinner. So next up is building relationships. Now, it's long been known that Hollywood is an industry of insiders, and there's not a lot of breaking those ranks, but it's key to know that that's not just for Hollywood. As a product manager or product leader, your stakeholders' buy-in is going to matter more than in almost any environment I've seen, right? And we've seen this at a corporate structure level, and this isn't just who's the actor or the agent or the showrunner. This is affecting the tech side of the world, the orgs. Platform level decisions are being made based on org structures a lot. So it's really this is really an industry where the relationships you have will help you succeed or not, depending on how much you invest in them. As a great example, going back to Quibi, I don't think if this was Jeremy's startup, that $750 million round would have materialized quite as quickly. But when you put a known tech insider and a known Hollywood insider together, look at what they were able to accomplish. And then the final example is the launch of HBO Max, which is now on Comcast, still not on Roku and Fire TV, though I'm sure those are coming soon. What's interesting here is it's not good enough in media to just know the platforms you have to be on. You have to go get the deals with those companies and build the terms. And sometimes you might not even know where to go to. If you're doing a media startup and you want to be on Roku, it's not just download their API and get to work. It's also building relationships, getting featured, and all the same kind of work you might do in, for example, the App Store. So as a PM, make sure you're really working with your departments that are your stakeholders, not just telling them what happened. Never going to be successful at that path. A great example I have actually is when I was working at CBS Interactive, we had a programmatic ad team that was trying to maximize page yield and revenue. And we had a user experience team that was trying to maximize NPS score, recurring visits, all those user-centric metrics. What we did is we put their KPIs together. So the programmatic ad sales team had to keep NPS score in mind, and the page load experience team had to keep revenue and yield in their minds, and it actually worked out very well. We got to, I don't know if it was the perfectly optimal outcome, but good enough to make a lot of people very happy. So the more you can think, how do you bring your stakeholders together and not just treat them as people you need to inform, but people you need to engage, I think the more successes you'll see. You may have heard we are a bit of a complicated industry in some ways, as I've already been hinting at. Here's a few more examples of how basic stakeholdership isn't necessarily enough because of the interwoven nature of the industry. I mentioned before HBO Max on Roku. Well, Roku can now make different decisions than they could in the past, right? It's similar to Apple in the App Store and Google to a different degree, but Roku can actually control which shows, which episodes, what content is going to where, when, and who. And that's a lot of pronoun game in there. But you can't just decide you have a cool video app and hope to get the distribution you need if you don't have the time happening with the companies who make the devices. Another great example, Tubi was on a meteoric rise, growing fast. I mean, they were nowhere, and then they were everywhere, and then Fox just bought them. And the reason I'm talking about this is to point out something even bigger about consolidation in the media space. Now, I'll give your eyes just a couple of seconds to look through this. These are the planet-sized metaphors of how big the companies in the media and tech landscape are. And you're seeing a small blip would be Activision or Nintendo, or even Marvel, which is now part of Disney, of course. The reason I'm bringing this up is you never know who's going to buy who. This is a game of eyeballs. If you were to pick any two random companies on this list and merge them, I don't think you'd see anyone being too shocked by it. So you need to keep in mind who owns what really matters. And here's the best example of all. So Harry Potter movies were actually Warner Brothers produced. So when HBO Max launched, all of the movies were there on HBO Max. But as of mid-August, they're now off HBO Max and onto Peacock, which is owned by NBC Universal. Why? Because NBCU has the streaming rights to it for the next 5 years. Some of these deals often are 20 years long. Some of the deals include ad-based rights or on-demand-based rights, transactional rights, streaming rights, regional rights, device rights. So I'm just going to leave it. If this were a Facebook relationship, it would be complicated. So your job, as much as you can, is navigate these waters and keep that consumer mindset on with everything you're doing, right? Because some of these things are just out of your control. So the more you're aware that they're there and that you might need to spend 12 weeks just researching who has the rights to the thing you want to use, that might be part of the game you're playing here. And next up, not all media is the same. I'm not sure where this thought process has come, but the number of conversations I get into where people talk about media interchangeably. But I hate to say it, music's not TV, which isn't movies, which isn't podcasts, which isn't news articles, which isn't YouTube, which isn't TikTok. They're all distinct and they're all different. You don't binge music, you listen to it while doing other things, right? No one's ever binged through all of U2's albums. I'm sure we've listened to them all in a row, but we don't think of it the same way because binging implies completing a journey, whereas you might re-listen to music over and over again, and you might never rewatch a given episode of a TV show, even the ones you love, because it's just not the nature of the media type. So 4 interesting examples. TiVo's putting ads into its DVR. Now, we're used to ads on TV, so that fits in well, but we're not really used to pre-roll DVR ads because we think of that as our content. So what will the impact be? Unsure at this time. Movie theaters are starting to put in programmatic advertising. So programmatic ads work great on the web where we have tons of detail about who's visiting our websites. But what happens in digital out of home? Very curious. Who knows? We'll see. Could this improve the ad experience in your local movie theaters? Maybe. Now, I don't know. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. I'm actually one of the rare households that is part of this experiment. And I've tried it a couple of times, and it's actually kind of fun. It doesn't quite work for me personally because I'm a highly deliberate watcher, which means when I sit down, I know what I'm going to watch. But a lot of people use Netflix as a background tool. And studies have shown that the average household spends over 20 minutes per session browsing content menus. So having a little shuffle button, hey, maybe an idea that sounds like, why would you do that, is actually the perfect thing for a world stymied with media choices. And then lastly, and I am coming back to them one last time, is Quibi. I think they're an example where they didn't necessarily know the user behaviors on short form content as well as they could have. Maybe just focusing on learning around what are people doing on YouTube and TikTok would have helped inform their product experience a lot better. So as a PM, I think the tip I give you is learn, but don't always copy. Now, the media industry has pretty harsh deadlines. And what I mean by that is you can't go full agile in media. You have to have more flexibility than you might in other product lines. Here's 3 good examples as to why. First, for most people, TV and radio, they never crashed. Apps crash, websites crash, servers crash. It's normal, it's understood, but the tolerance in our space is a lot lower. So audiences get upset, and they get upset fast when they can't get to the content they want to watch. Another great example, election night's coming. Whether we like it or not, we will not talk politics today. The election is coming, and therefore everybody and anybody who's going to be covering election night has to be ready in real time for when the votes start coming in. But the best examples of all, movies and the Super Bowl, they don't come when when we reach our perfect moment. The dates are set and they are not changing. Unless, of course, there is a global pandemic, which will apparently result in movies delays. Short of that, there isn't one. So if you're building, whether it's a game for a movie, an online experience, a website, an app that goes along with any form of media property, the people building the content and getting ready to launch, they want to know when you're going to ship. So you need to find a way to use agile methodologies, but also give predictable deadlines and outcomes. So I want to thank everybody for their time today. Here's a summary of what we talked about. It's a rapidly changing world with new platforms launching almost every day. Don't forget the world that came before, because it's still just as relevant as ever. We've got lots of opportunities around data and content user experiences. Then the tips are basically keep it fun, build cool stuff because people love to be entertained. Make sure you're working really well within your company and within the industry. Try to figure out how you can not accidentally make a big mess of everything as you're going or get caught up in somebody else's big mess. Remember that every media type's a little different. And again, never go full agile, just do our best. Thank you for your time.